probably triggers and tickles a primitive part of our brain that you might not know is even in there. But once you get it, it's really kind of something harkens back to a time way before of our ancestors. And it's kind of a cool thing to experience firsthand. Yeah, same thing with dog mushing too. If any of y'all are going to go dog mushing, those are the original beasts of burden. Right now, this highway was built in the 50s. We're riding along the old Iditarod Trail. It started in Seward. Now, the big race that we hear every year, the Iditarod race, that does not start in Seward. That one starts in Anchorage and makes its way to Nome. But this is the original route, as Seward is our only year-round deep water port before World War II, and we made Whittier available for us to use. And so all the letters, all the packages throughout the whole winter, they'd all be coming into Seward, and a caravan of wild mushers would be coming through this area with their pups, making this trek, come rain or sleet or snow or hail, all going down to deliver that mail. It's quite an event when you see the Iditarod take off out of Anchorage. If you get the opportunity to come the first weekend of March, you set up shop at 4th and Cordova. That's the first turn in the run. Now the times in downtown Anchorage, these are not held against the musher. When the race starts, it's a ceremonial start. They're going to pack up all their dogs and they're going to go about 50 miles north of Anchorage is where they're officially going to start. But this is just a fun thing just for people to get entertained by. And if you have a favorite musher, you can pay to ride in their sled through downtown Anchorage as all the adoring crowds come out and cheer on their dogs. But this is mankind's first technology. We've been working with these dogs for thousands and thousands of years. Before we ever put a harness on a horse, before we ever, put a saddle on a horse, dogs have been eating their lunch for generations. The native people along the west coast of the United States, they never had horses, and they'd lash two sticks together, a real primitive sled. They refer to nowadays as travois, and they would leave these ruts in the earth and the clay that we can still see today, thousands of years old, as they would haul 40 to 60 pounds of meat each pup could haul away from a kill site. It really worked out pretty well for us, trust a man's best friend. And so yeah, at the race, you got 50 mushers and 800 dogs all keyed up, ready with all that excitement to run 1,000 miles. The dogs are screaming. I drove horse carriage for years on Mackinac Island in Upper Michigan. That's where I got my start in seasonal work. And horses are never really that exuberant. And they are real exuberant to go. It's a really unpleasant experience to have to try to hold them back. But the dogs, their exuberance is fun. It's a contagious excitement, and they're all taken up. And you don't have a bit in their mouth. It's not like driving a horse where you can steer them as well. You're just counting on your vocal cues. You're basically just tied to a sled with a bunch of dogs, and you're just hoping they listen when you yell G or ha. Unlike Yukon Cornelius, you don't actually whip the dogs. It's not a thing that would ever work because the dogs won't run. They'll just stop. When dogs get swatted or a newspaper or something, they don't run. They just cringe and they'll just stop right there. So the sport is inherently anti-cruelty to dogs because dogs won't work if you're cruel to them. That's just how it ends up working out for people out here. And so it's kind of interesting that every year when the contest takes off, we get these animal rights protesters that show up. We figure as long as they're there anyway, what a good time to sell fur. So we sell furs at the same time. So as you're watching the dogs take off, especially at 4th and Cordova where they miss their turn because they're so excited to smell a hot dog cart and they just go off in their own little way, crash into the crowd. We got volunteers that have to try to untangle them and get them going along the route before the next dog comes down the chute. Just that pandemonium and excitement. And then there's random guys with trench coats like drug dealers opening them up. Hey, I got what you need. You need a beaver pelt. I got a fox pelt. I got all these different pelts that they work their trap lines all throughout the bush, and they buy that plane ticket for that big event, and they go to up and down, cash on the barrel. You can get yourself a real nice fur and keep yourself nice and cozy as the dogs are running down the route. Coming up to Kenai Lake here, Kenai River. Named after a tribe that was out here, the Kenai Peninsula. The Kenai, that's a native word for the group of people that were out here. Kenai Lake is massive. If you were to look at it from overhead, it's It's actually the shape of the letter Z, because it zigzags through the mountains up here. 26 miles from tip to tip to tip to tip, the Z-shaped lake. It's as deep as 400 feet deep. We have a lot of water here. The great state of Alaska is known as the land of over 3 million lakes, of which about 3,500 are named. We have a lot of unnamed lakes. The well-known axiom among float plane pilots, you never want a lake named after you if you're a float plane pilot. Now, there's good fishing out here. In addition to the salmon that come up the streams in our lakes here, we stock them. We've got trout, dolly varden, grayling. Lucky you can catch a burbot. It's a freshwater lingcod, described as poor man's lobster. Really good eat. And we got a lot of good water up here in Alaska. When you get to your hotel in Anchorage, before you drink that bottled water, run the cold water tap until that condensation forms on the pipe and you get that ice-cold, delicious glacier water. Then just stick your head under that spigot and just drink it straight from the tap. It is some phenomenally good water we have here in Alaska. It's one of the things I love about living here. I don't have to use the little pitcher, the little filters, or the RO. That water tastes great right out of the tap. Pretty good stuff. Pretty valuable stuff. They say water's the new oil. And we're well positioned once again up here in Alaska. There's actually been talk of putting in a pipeline all the way to the west coast of the United States in the southwest that's so parched. We're going to work out a deal and sell our water to California. Now, we're not giving it to them. We're going to get paid. We learned from Colorado's mistakes. We're getting paid for our water up here. We sure do. Yeah, we don't protest our oil here in Alaska. We're pretty big fans of drill baby drill. That's how we roll up here. And some people kind of say, well, but isn't the Arctic warming faster than anywhere else? Yeah, it is. You probably shouldn't burn so much oil. But if you're going to burn it anyway, you should burn ours. All right? We're getting paid, and so we're pretty pro-development for our oil. That big oil pipeline. Yeah, we end up getting a share of that revenue. We're in a better financial position than any other state out there. Every other state has negative money. If they were broke, they'd have more money than they have. Every other state in debt up to their eyeballs. Here in Alaska, we have $60 billion sitting in the bank. 60 billion with a B. And so all that oil revenue, that's what gave us that surplus. And we also don't have to pay state income tax. We have 0% state income tax and 0% state sales tax. And all thanks to that oil revenue. Like something's going on here. Interesting. This wasn't going on before. Oh, they're drilling. There we go. They're going to dynamite out this hillside. And they're in the process of trying to widen this road. It's been quite a project watching them. You can kind of see the tracks where the skid steer goes up alongside the edges here, and watching them scoot up that hillside there. It's pretty wild. Pretty brave construction workers out here. Quite a task to try to widen this road. Now, this is kind of a sketchy part of the road. As you see, there's no shoulder. They've finally blown away and taken down these trees. And as they've been taking down these trees, they still have traffic coming through here, and you end up with a big tree trunk 3 feet around that swings inches from your bus as you're cruising along through here. But yeah, if you have a breakdown out here, there's no shoulder, and so it's a pretty sketchy situation along this little corridor here. It's actually the most dangerous highway in America per capita. It's a little sketchy. So fortunately, we have an experienced driver with us today. Anna's been doing this for over a decade. She's got a lot of experience doing this, and I sleep like a baby on her bus. If you weren't here, I would be fast asleep. I have vehicular narcolepsy. There's something about being in the bus that sleeps well. Some of you are thinking, we would have liked to have been sleeping too, Rick, but there's a speaker that's blaring this irritating voice here. It's grating on me. Well, you'll thank me later. This is a beautiful ride. You don't want to sleep for this trip. This is a pretty nice ride. I really enjoy this drive. I've been doing it for a long time, and it's still enjoyable every trip. Never gets old. Now, these massive trees that they took down, people always ask, are they going to use that wood to make log cabins? If you talk to locals here with log cabins, the only people who like log cabins are people who've never had a log cabin. They're really a nightmare for maintenance. My cousin ended up building one up in Talkeetna, and interestingly enough, he imported the logs from the mainland. because this spruce here, it's not going to last as long. If you don't have the materials, yeah, you use what's available. But with all the labor that goes into building something like that, you might as well spend a little extra on the materials and have it last a lot longer. But it's extremely labor intensive. Once you build the log cabin, you think, oh, you got this nice natural material for your home that you're going to have to paint and poison over and over and over again to keep everything from eating your home. Constantly under attack. You got the birds trying to put holes in your home. You got the ants trying to build tunnels in your home. You got the mushrooms. Even the mushrooms are going after your home. You're never safe, and so you're constantly having to paint all these toxins and pound these borate rods and do what you can to try to protect your home. And it's not very insulated. A lot of people think, oh, it'll be nice and warm. Look how thick your walls are. It's got nothing on a stick frame home with fiberglass insulation. That wood. The one thing it's got going for it, thermal mass. So it is nice in the summertime up in Talkeetna where the days can get over 80 degrees. It gets obscenely hot. And then you get those nights that cool down into the low 60s. And so that house kind of moderates the temperature and keeps it around 70. But once winter time comes and all the chinking as the house settles, you have to constantly redo all the chinking between the logs. And that heat does hemorrhage out the house pretty quickly. So log cabins seem like a good idea, but ultimately in practice there's a lot of sacrifices you're making for that nice ambiance. Are y'all comfortable temperature-wise back there? Is anybody too hot still? Everybody's comfortable? All right, good deal. I always check to see if they're too hot. Some people are like, you never asked if we're too cool. But we do tend to try to keep it around 68, 70s. It kind of helps with motion sickness to be a little cooler. And it also helps for snuggling. If you're traveling with somebody else, go ahead and give them a little snuggle. Get consent first, though. Make sure you know the person next to you. And, that's right. That is the great thing about Alaska, is a welcoming, friendly bunch of folks. I really do love it up here, because I've lived a lot of beautiful places, and when you go to beautiful places, a lot of times the locals don't really care for the other people enjoying their beautiful place. I lived in Colorado for a spell, where pasty white people had bumper stickers that said native on them, and they complained about all the people moving to their area, which I thought was really rich. I really got a kick out of that. We moved here, we've been here, my forefathers came here in the 1980s, and now all these people have come here and ruined the place. And it's like, yeah, well, that's what happens. And I lived in Hawaii, and you hear the Howley go home sentiment. A lot of folks not liking all the Howleys moving to Hawaii. It's not enough space, and it's understandable. It's all the people crowding there. But you talk about moving to Alaska, boy, you'll get a hearty laugh and a slap on the back. Come on down. We'd love to have you here. All right, I can get you 2 or 3 jobs by tomorrow. And bring some women with you, though. Definitely bring some women with you. There's a shortage of women in the state. Some communities feel it more than others. We're going to be coming to Moose Pass here in a little bit. Town of 250 people. The last census, 150 men, 100 women. All right, and so it does kind of throw off our ability to settle down with somebody. And throughout the state, it's a little more even. It's about 55% men, 45% women. You hear that, and you're like, oh, it's not so bad. That's only 5% off from 50-50. Among the human race, normally it's more women than men. Typically, we have 55% women and 45% men. And so the statistics are skewed a little ways in the women's favor. And I'll say for a lady looking for a guy in Alaska, if you haven't heard this phrase before, you will hear it again if you go around the state, is that for a lady looking for a guy, the odds are good, but the goods are odd. That is the one little caveat. A bunch of folks that you have moving up here, sometimes they're kind of end of the line type of folks. You get the antisocial types, that you get the outlaws. You do kind of get some of the folks that romanticize this great land. Sometimes they're not always the best dating material, but a lot of good people too, though, and a pretty great place to be. Yeah, this is Trail River and Trail Lake here. So named because this is part of the Iditarod Trail. In the wintertime, you'd be going right over that ice. That is the center line of the trail, right in the middle of that lake. And hard hard to imagine what that would have been like back in the day. And not even that long ago. 1925 was the Serum Run to Nome, less than 100 years ago. My grandmother had been alive at that point when that thing went down. It's pretty wild to imagine that. And man's best friend, it wasn't so long ago. And now some people that are aware of their history, they kind of think about the 1925, but planes existed in 1925 by then. But they were very, very primitive planes back then. And in a snowstorm with 40 below zero temperatures, an unpressurized cockpit, and a water-cooled engine, it's not really a practical way of getting medicine to Nome, Alaska. Now here we're coming into Moose Pass. This is that town I was telling you about, 250 people. Now Moose Pass is a half hour outside of Seward. And you may have noticed since we left Seward, there hasn't been a gas station. And you're not going to see one. We're going to go about 100 miles with no gas station. The next gas station you see will be the busiest gas station in the state of Alaska. But they've talked about putting one in Moose Pass. As the story goes, there was an investor. Seems like a good idea. We got 250 people that live here. All the folks that don't plan appropriately when they're driving down from Anchorage. It'd be a pretty lucrative business. And they had a whole mock-up of what it was going to look like. It looked really cute. And the people of Moose Pass were not having it. They made it abundantly clear that this idea was not welcome here. And really their big hang-up, they didn't want to be the laughing stock of the Seward Highway with a big sign that says Moose Pass Gas above their town. That was kind of a non-starter. And so there is no gas station in Moose Pass today. That joke's older than myself, but I think it does hold a little true here because I've been telling that one for years. That's kind of funny. When I worked on the Alaska Railroad, I worked there the year that joke got phased out because some nerd told us, like, oh no, that's unprofessional, we can't tell those kind of jokes. Okay? Yeah, that might offend somebody. A fart joke might offend somebody, so they had to do away with that joke. And it was kind of interesting that later in the year, the CEO, Bill O'Leary, he's the first CEO the Alaska Railroad has had in decades, actually rose up the ranks from the Alaska Railroad instead of some CEO we pulled from another company. And he rode the train, and we go through Moose Pass, and he taps the conductor. He says, "Hey, why didn't they tell a Moose Pass gas joke?" And he had to say, "Oh no, well, one of the nerds said we can't do that joke anymore." And he says, "You can do that joke. Use that joke." And so it kind of made his little return to the railroad. And if any of you are saying that you want to take the railroad for a trip, there are day trips out of Anchorage you can take that'll bring you right back to Anchorage.